You see, before we can even begin to master the art of self-control, we must come home to ourselves. And that means learning how to love who we are. Not the curated version, not the one we've polished for the world, but the version that exists when no one is watching. Because self-control is not the denial of who we are, it's the direction of who we are. And we cannot guide what we do not know. We cannot discipline what we do not cherish. When we talk about self-control, we often think of it as something external, resisting the urge to speak out, avoiding the temptation to overindulge, staying on track with our goals. But the deeper truth is that genuine self-control is born from self-regard. It is not an act of restriction, but one of reverence. We learn to say no not because we are punishing ourselves, but because we understand our worth, our energy, and our purpose. It is from this place of self-awareness and gentle love that our greatest discipline emerges. Now, many people struggle with this. They believe that self-love is soft, even indulgent. They confuse it with ego or arrogance. But the love I speak of, the love that forms the foundation of self-control, is neither boastful nor blind. It is conscious, it is clear, it is the kind of love that says, I am enough as I am, and I am worthy of choosing what serves me. When we begin to cultivate this kind of inner relationship, everything changes. Suddenly, we are no longer driven by impulse or fear or the desperate need for validation. We become grounded, rooted, and from that place of inner stillness we make different choices. We pause where we once reacted. We speak with intention where we once lashed out. We honor our bodies, our time, our boundaries, not because someone told us to, but because we know we deserve to. That is the quiet strength of self-control. It does not need to shout. It does not need to dominate. It simply holds its ground in the presence of chaos. It is not rigid, but it is resolute. And when it is rooted in self-love, it becomes sustainable. Because love will carry us farther than fear ever could. Fear burns out. Fear turns inward. But love, real love, endures. It elevates. Think of it this way. When a gardener tends to a plant, they don't pull it harshly in the direction they want it to grow. They nourish the soil, they ensure the roots are deep and healthy, they provide sunlight and water, and they remove what no longer serves. Self-control works the same way. It is not forceful manipulation. It is loving cultivation. You are not broken. You are not out of control. You are simply learning how to return to your center. And the more you practice meeting yourself with kindness, the more naturally self-discipline will arise. You'll no longer need to fight against yourself. You will be able to lead yourself quietly, calmly, powerfully. So the next time you think of self-control, I invite you to replace the image of clenched fists with open hands. Hands that are ready to nurture, hands that are ready to lead, hands that say, I am here, I am present, and I choose with love. And always remember, the most powerful control is not over others, it is the gentle, loving authority we hold within ourselves. If we are to lead ourselves with any measure of grace, we must begin by recognizing that our minds are not neutral. Our thoughts are not simply passing clouds in a sky we have no control over. Every single thought we think leaves an imprint on our emotions, on our behavior, and most importantly, on the reality we experience. This is not just spiritual insight. This is psychological truth. The way we perceive the world begins with the way we speak to ourselves. Too often we underestimate the power of our inner dialogue. We allow it to run unchecked as if it were just background noise. But the truth is that noise becomes a script, and that script becomes a life. If we continually tell ourselves, I'm not disciplined, I always give in, I can't control myself, then our actions will rise to meet that belief, not because it's the truth, but because we've repeated it enough times for it to become our truth. The subconscious mind accepts repetition as reality. It doesn't question whether a statement is helpful, loving, or even rational. It simply absorbs. And so, every time we choose to feed ourselves a thought of limitation, we reinforce the very habits we wish to change. This is why the journey towards self-control must also be a journey of mental re-education. We must become conscious caretakers of our inner conversation. Louise Hay often said, "Every thought we think is creating our future." And this is not wishful thinking. It's personal responsibility at the highest level. When we begin to observe our thoughts with clarity rather than judgment, we reclaim power. We recognize that we are not our thoughts, we are the thinker of those thoughts. And if we can think something destructive, we can just as powerfully think something constructive. This is where self-control becomes more than willpower. It becomes awareness, because once we understand the direct connection between the thoughts we repeat and the choices we make, we are no longer asleep at the wheel. We begin to notice that certain patterns of self-sabotage follow specific thought patterns. We begin to see that our moments of weakness are not character flaws. They are simply the echo of unchallenged beliefs. When we lead ourselves first, we do not force ourselves into submission. We illuminate the false narratives and lovingly replace them with truth. I am learning to make aligned choices. I can trust myself. I am capable of change. These are not empty affirmations. These are seeds, and with daily watering through repetition, reflection, and compassion, they grow into habits of clarity, habits of restraint, habits of peace. The mind is not your enemy. It is a garden, and just like any garden, it will produce whatever you plant. If you plant criticism, you will harvest shame. If you plant fear, you will harvest hesitation. But if you plant love, if you plant patience, if you plant discipline grounded in self-worth, you will harvest a reality that reflects your highest values. Self-control, then, is not just the ability to pause before acting. It is the deeper ability to pause before believing, to question the automatic thought, to offer ourselves a more loving interpretation. And the more often we do this, the more naturally self-guidance becomes. So I encourage you, before you try to control your behavior, listen to the words you feed your mind. What are you rehearsing in silence? What beliefs are you practicing without even realizing it? Change the narrative and you will change the outcome. Because in the end, the most powerful act of leadership is choosing your thoughts deliberately. That is where true mastery begins. In a world that constantly demands motion, productivity, and speed, stillness is often mistaken for weakness. We've been taught that success belongs to those who hustle, that value is found in constant doing, and that silence must always be filled. But this belief is not only misleading, it's exhausting, and it's one of the greatest obstacles to true self-control. Real strength, quiet, rooted strength, comes from stillness, not the kind of stillness that is passive or indifferent, but the kind that is deeply awake, alert, and intentional. When we choose to be still, we choose to listen rather than react. We choose to observe rather than judge. We begin to hear the soft inner voice beneath the noise of fear, urgency, and distraction. and that voice is wise. It knows when to act, and more importantly, when not to. Self-control is not about becoming robotic or emotionless. It is not the suppression of feeling. It is the ability to pause long enough to feel what is true, to create space between stimulus and response. And it is in that sacred space where stillness lives, that clarity is born. We make poor choices not because we are broken or weak, but because we are rushed. We react from patterns instead of choosing from presence. Stillness is what allows us to step outside the patterns. It gives us access to ourselves. It's the difference between being swept away by a wave of emotion and choosing how to move with it. And this stillness doesn't require hours of meditation or silence. It requires willingness, just a breath, a conscious pause, a moment of inquiry. Is this thought mine? Is this action aligned? What am I actually feeling? These questions, asked sincerely in moments of quiet, are powerful instruments of self-leadership. Louise Hay often spoke of the body as a messenger and the mind as a tool. Stillness is how we hear the messages. It's how we understand the tools we've been given. You cannot tune a piano while it's being played, and you cannot align your thoughts, emotions, or behaviors without moments of intentional stillness. That stillness is not empty, it is rich. It holds answers, direction, healing. Philosophers and mystics across cultures have always known this. The Stoics taught that tranquility is the highest good. The Buddhists teach that non-reactivity is the door to liberation. And modern psychology agrees our nervous systems are most regulated, our decisions most rational when we are calm. Stillness is not the opposite of power. It is the foundation of it. When we don't allow space for stillness, we are more easily pulled by other people's urgency, other people's expectations, other people's emotional states. We become reactive, disconnected from our inner authority. But when we reclaim that space, even for a few quiet minutes each day, we strengthen our internal compass. We stop operating on borrowed energy. We lead from within. Stillness is not about doing less. It's about being more. More present, more aware, more attuned to your own wisdom. When you develop the discipline to sit with yourself without the need to fix, distract, or rush, you discover that there is nothing weak about pausing. In fact, it takes extraordinary strength to remain still in a world that pushes you to constantly move. So, the next time you're tempted to respond in haste, to chase what isn't yours, or to silence discomfort with noise, try this instead. Stop. Breathe, let stillness meet you, and in that moment, ask yourself, what does my highest self want to do next? Because sometimes the most courageous act of self-leadership is to simply be still. One of the most profound expressions of self-control is the ability to set clear, loving boundaries. Yet so many of us resist this. We've been taught to believe that boundaries push people away, that they are selfish, cold, or rigid. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Boundaries do not keep love out, they create the structure within which love can thrive. They are not walls, they are doors. They are how we teach the world how to treat us. When we do not set boundaries, we abandon ourselves. Slowly, quietly, we say yes when we mean no. We allow behaviors that drain us. We stretch ourselves until we no longer recognize the shape of our own needs. And over time, this neglect doesn't just damage our relationship, it erodes our sense of self. We begin to lose clarity, not just about what we want, but about who we are. Setting a boundary is not an act of control over others. It's an act of protection for the self, and that protection is not rooted in fear, but in respect. Respect for your time, respect for your energy, respect for your emotional well-being. Because the truth is, if we are constantly giving from an empty place, what we offer others becomes a shadow of what it could be. Self-control means knowing your limits and honoring them without guilt. Louise Hay spoke often about how everything begins with self-approval. When we approve of ourselves fully and honestly, we no longer feel the need to explain or defend our boundaries. We simply live in alignment with our truth, and that truth speaks for itself. It is calm, it is clear, it is kind, and it does not apologize for existing. Boundaries also require a deep level of self-awareness. You must know what your values are before you can protect them. You must know what drains you before you can avoid it. You must be honest about what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. Clarity can has been feel WOVEN into this comfortable tapestry of at his perfect, WILL, especially if you've spent years pleasing others, avoiding conflict, or silencing your own discomfort. But it is in that discomfort that the real transformation begins. Philosophically, boundaries are a recognition of the self as sacred. When you set a boundary, you are saying, I matter, my peace matters, my purpose matters. And that declaration is not just for others, it's for you. Each time you choose yourself, gently but firmly, you strengthen your inner authority. You build the trust required to lead yourself through life with integrity. Now, this doesn't mean being harsh or inflexible. In fact, the most effective boundaries are communicated with softness. You don't have to raise your voice to make your needs known. You don't have to justify, explain, or prove your right to peace. A boundary is strongest when it comes from a place of calm certainty, not emotional reactivity. This is where self-control and self-love begin to merge. Because every boundary you set with the outside world reinforces a commitment to your inner world. It becomes a living affirmation. I am worthy of space. I am worthy of protection. I am worthy of respect. And so I invite you to examine your life, your relationships, your habits, your time commitments. Where are you saying yes when you mean no? Where are you sacrificing your well-being for someone else's comfort? Begin to shift, even if it's subtle. One decision at a time, one new response, one honest conversation. Each of these is a quiet revolution. Because in the end, true self-control isn't just about discipline, it's about devotion. A devotion to the self that no longer tolerates what dishonors its peace. Remember this, every time you draw a boundary with the world, you deepen your connection with yourself. That is not distance, that is love. There's a deeply rooted misunderstanding in how we think about discipline. We tend to see it as something harsh, something cold and rigid, almost punitive in nature. But true discipline, the kind that sustains transformation and nourishes self-control, is not punishment. It is love in action. It is structure built on compassion. When we approach discipline from this higher perspective, it ceases to be a burden and becomes a gift. At its core, discipline is the daily act of remembering who you are and who you are becoming. It is choosing again and again to stay aligned with your values, even when it's not convenient, even when it's not easy. But if we attempt to build discipline through self-criticism or shame, it will collapse. because anything rooted in fear is not sustainable. It will drain us rather than elevate us. Louise Hay taught us that change must come through gentleness. You cannot hate yourself into growth. You cannot shame yourself into excellence. You must encourage, uplift, and guide yourself as you would a dear friend or a beloved child. That is where real discipline begins, not with control, but with care, not with pressure, but with presence. We often assume that being disciplined means being strict with ourselves, pushing harder, doing more. But discipline, when viewed through the lens of self-respect, becomes much softer. It's about consistency, not cruelty. It's about showing up for yourself with love, even on the days when motivation is absent. And it's about understanding that the small, quiet choices you make each day are far more powerful than any grand gesture. Psychologically, habits shape identity. Every time you follow through on a promise to yourself, you cast a vote for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. I am someone who follows through. I am someone who honors my word. These identities are not born overnight. They are built slowly and patiently through disciplined, loving repetition. You see, self-control is not a single dramatic act. It is a series of micro decisions. It's waking up 5 minutes earlier to center your mind. It's choosing to prepare a nourishing meal instead of reaching for something that numbs you. It's putting your phone down to be present with your thoughts. These moments may seem small, but they are sacred. They are your way of saying, I matter, my future matters, my peace matters, and yes, there will be days you fall out of rhythm. That's part of being human, but the discipline rooted in love does not punish you for slipping. It invites you back without judgment. It says, let's begin again. That invitation, that return, is where the power lies, because discipline is not about perfection, it's about devotion. A gentle, steady devotion to your highest self. When we embrace this mindset, self-control becomes less of a battle and more of a relationship where you listen, adapt, recommit. You don't force yourself into obedience. You guide yourself into alignment. That's a very different energy, and it makes all the difference. So if you've struggled with discipline, ask yourself, have I been trying to force myself through fear or guide myself through love? The answer to that question can change the way you lead yourself entirely. Because in the end, discipline is not what restricts your freedom. It's what protects it. It's not what confines you. It's what strengthens you. And when it is born of love, it becomes the most generous promise you can make to yourself. At some point on the journey of self-leadership, we will stumble. We will break our own promises. We'll say one thing and do another. We'll fall back into old habits that we thought we had long left behind. And in those moments, it can be tempting to double down on discipline, to shame ourselves into getting back on track. But this approach is not healing, it is not wise. It disconnects us from the very foundation of true self-leadership, self-forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about excusing the choices we've made, it's about understanding why we made them. It's about holding space for the part of ourselves that was tired, afraid, uncertain, or simply doing the best it could with the awareness it had. When we lead ourselves from a place of compassion, we do not ignore accountability. We elevate it because we're not punishing, we're learning. Louise Hay often reminded us that we are always doing the best we can with the information, emotional tools, and beliefs we hold at any given time. When you know better, you do better. But before you knew better, you were still worthy of love. And this is the paradox. Growth cannot happen in the presence of ongoing self-rejection. You cannot evolve from a place of self-loathing. You must meet your past self with grace if you expect your future self to thrive. Many people view self-control as a kind of harshness, a relentless inner critic that whips them into shape. But that kind of control is brittle. It cracks under pressure. Real self-leadership is supple. It bends without breaking. It knows that you are human and that your value is never defined by a single mistake or even 1,000 of them. Your value is inherent, unshakable. Forgiveness doesn't mean you abandon responsibility. It means you reclaim it with clarity and love. When you say, "Yes, I did that, and I now choose something higher," you are not erasing the past. You are redeeming it. You're transforming it into fuel. Every time you forgive yourself, you strengthen your inner relationship. And from that repaired relationship, better decisions naturally arise. Psychologically, this creates a powerful shift. Shame keeps us stuck in cycles. It tells us, "You failed, so you always will." But forgiveness says, "You failed, and you're still free to try again." That distinction is everything. Because only when you believe you're worthy of trying again do you actually start to live differently. Self-forgiveness is also an act of emotional maturity. It requires that we move beyond blame of ourselves and others and take full ownership of how we want to move forward. It asks us to release the narrative of victimhood and instead embrace the role of conscious creator. This is where our true power lies, and it's in this power that self-control transforms from something we force into something we embody. You cannot lead yourself from a wounded voice. You must heal that voice through listening, through kindness, through honesty. And then, once it has been heard, it will stop shouting. It will soften. It will trust you. And in that trust, self-leadership becomes effortless. So, if you're holding on to guilt, if you're repeating mental punishments for past choices, I encourage you to pause, to breathe, to acknowledge what happened, and then to say to yourself, gently but firmly, "That was then. This is now. And I choose to lead myself with love." Because in the end, the strength to move forward doesn't come from perfection. It comes from forgiveness. That is where your leadership truly begins.